All right. Good afternoon. I'm Dave Anderson, and I serve as chair of the Master's Level Psychology Licensed Clinical Psychotherapy Advisory Committee of the Kansas Behavioral Sciences Regulatory Board. I asked the members of the advisory committee to respond to a roll call to signify their presence at this open meeting that is being conducted remotely by conference call and other electronic medium. Ginger Hill.
Yes, couldn't find my mouse.
Rebecca Jabara.
Here.
Bruce Johnson. Lauren Luck. Sarah McMillan.
Here.
Iris Pauley.
Present.
Jennifer Schreiner.
Here.
Joshua Tangaway.
Here.
And Kari Wold.
Present.
I note the following BSRB staff members are also present. David Fye.
Here.
And is Leslie joining us?
I don't think Leslie will be joining us today.
Okay, very good. Next, David Fye will read a message concerning this meeting being held remotely.
Thank you, Dave. This is David Fye, Executive Director for the Kansas Behavioral Sciences Regulatory Board. Public comment allows the public to address the advisory committee about any concerns, but the Kansas Open Meeting Act, or KOMA, does not require the advisory committee to provide public comment or take questions from individuals. Any individuals wishing to provide public comment could contact the Executive Director prior to the meeting by sending an email to david.fye@ks.gov. There will be no time for public comment today, as no individuals have requested time for public comment. Because we are conducting this public meeting remotely by conference call and other electronic means, I state for the record the following information. Public access to this meeting is conducted by medium of interactive communication that allows members of the public without cost to attend the meeting through the use of the conference call and on the board's YouTube channel. While the meeting is conducted remotely, the requirements of the KOMA are not suspended. Therefore, we would be conducting this meeting pursuant to the KOMA. On March 12th, 2025, we sent notice to the advisory committee meeting to all individuals who had requested notice of such meeting. The notice was also posted on the board's website, ksbsrb.ks.gov. You may obtain a copy of the notice at that website. An agenda and other meeting material have been posted on the board's website and are available for review. You may also request a copy of the agenda specifically by sending an email to david.fye@ks.gov with the subject line request for the agenda, and it will be sent to you. The notice contains information for the conference call and the YouTube channel that allows the public to attend the meeting free of charge. The notice also states that if we have any technical issues during the meeting, you may call the board office at 785-296-3240 or send an email to bsrb@ks.gov. A recording of this meeting will be available on the BSRB YouTube channel following the conclusion of the meeting by using the link to the meeting on the agenda. And I did check the conference call line before we got started. There's no one currently on the line, but if I hear someone beep over, I will let you know. And during the introductory information, I believe Lauren was able to log in, so she's in attendance now as well.
Very good. The meeting is now called to order, and the advisory committee will begin its discussion of the first item on its agenda. So we will first ask if there are any additions to the agenda. All right, seeing none, then we would ask for the approval of the agenda.
Moved.
Second.
Thank you. We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor of the motion, please say aye. Very good. Same. Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Thank you. We'll then move to a review and approval of the minutes from the advisory committee meeting on February 7th, 2025. Any requested changes to the minutes? Seeing none, I'd entertain a motion.
So moved.
Thank
I'll
you.
second.
Thank you. We have a motion and a second. All in favor of the motion, please say aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Thank you. Dave, that takes us to the executive director's report.
Okay, thank you, Dave. Generally during this time, I go through some operations updates and then provide some legislative updates and then any kind of updates from the last board meeting. So we'll kind of follow that method again today. In terms of items that we're working on here in the office, a few of us have been experiencing a few changes. We've been going through upgrading our technology. Back when I first started, just a little over 4 years ago now, as executive director, the office had some desktop computers, and we decided to make a choice to go ahead and upgrade our technology and move more towards laptops, especially at that time when we were dealing with some of the effects of the pandemic. And so we got under the state's enterprise as a service system where we had leasing through the state Office of Information Technology Services. And those initial leases are up. So first group of us are switching those out. So you may notice a couple of different things we'll have to work around briefly while we get all of that figured out. And some of that we did a little bit today. So apologize for that. We're starting a couple minutes later than normal, but I think these things will be beneficial for everybody in the future. It's just, with new technology, it's always an adjustment period. But there's a lot of things that are going on behind the scenes. We're also working on shifting to the new licensing system. We've been meeting weekly with representatives from OITS to begin the transition over to working with Acela. The board heard information about Acela a few months back, and some services the state would be willing to cover if agencies are willing to move under the enterprise licensing system. And for us, it would also help us integrate a lot of our processes that are currently separate. So it was really a good idea to move that direction. The board was in favor of doing that. Now we're going through the hard work of looking at every process that we currently have to see how many of those things we can automate under a new agreement with Acela. And that goes into, if you're familiar with our website, going into all the different forms for all the different types of licensure and levels of licensure, and then even some things that aren't specifically related to licensure that maybe we can have automated instead of people printing a paper form, filling it out, mailing it to us. So we're really trying to take some steps forward as part of this process, not just switch from one vendor to another, but really change how we're doing things. And so it'll be really positive. It's just a lot of work right now. So I do compliment my staff. They've been in and out of meetings, as I have been as well with OITS. And we'll be doing this probably for about the next year and a half. They're wanting to capture all of our existing processes, then look for any duplication and improvements that can be made, and then propose those to be built into the new system. And then there'll need to be some testing. We know some things are going to be going away or changing. And so it's exciting, but again, with change, the things are always going to be a little different. So looking forward to continuing to work with OITS. They've been really good partners through this and other projects too. Concerning some legislative updates, I wanted to kind of give you an idea of where we are in the legislative session. So just as a reminder, in Kansas, the legislative session is generally just in the spring. The governor does have the authority to call special sessions or bring the legislature back for certain individual topics, but generally that does not occur. Usually the legislative session is about 90 days in the spring. Now it does differ how those 90 days are counted, but generally it starts around the second week in January, and then it goes sometime until about the middle of April. There are some breaks in between, and those breaks usually have to do with, the House tries to pass all House bills that have worked its way through committee, and then there's a break for the governor to review those bills, possibly veto them. The legislature comes back and makes a decision. Do we want to take any action if something is passed all the way through? And then there's another time period where the bills that are going through the normal process will get a hearing on the other chambers, committees, be passed on the chamber floor, and then the legislature generally takes a break at that period because by that point, a lot of the bills that are going to pass during the session are passed during that time period and move to the governor. The governor has the ability to sign those into law, to veto them, or take no action. And if the governor takes no action after a certain number of days, they become law. And so that is where we're at currently. The legislature made a big push to pass a certain list of legislation, and then they are currently on a break until about April 10th. And the legislative leadership is counting days a little bit differently than how they have done in the past. And so according to what I believe the calculations are, it looks like day 90 will be on April 12th. So I believe they're planning to come back just for a very brief time period and then maybe wrap up the session completely. Sometimes there is one mostly ceremonial day called sine die that the legislature can reserve for themselves in the future. And it's basically just to give them an opportunity to come back and revisit any vetoes from the governor. But usually at this period coming up, it's what we would call omnibus, where the legislature would come back, review any vetoes, also get updated revenue estimates, estimates on human service consensus caseloads, any kind of information about updated expenditures for things like education, and then they would make decisions. I have seen legislative sessions to where a budget was not passed until this part of the session coming up. This year, the legislature moved quickly and passed a budget on the House side. They passed a budget on the Senate side, and the overall budget bill has been passed. That doesn't mean they can't revisit certain items or they can't do sort of a cleanup bill for that process, but at least the big budget bill for the year has been processed and passed. That is now with the governor's office for review. Generally, the governor has the ability to veto legislation entirely or take no action. With the exception of the appropriations bill, the governor does have the authority to go in and do line item vetoes of certain things. And so if the governor does that, when the legislature comes back, they can also review the line item vetoes and decide if they want to take any of those individually, or I have seen them also take them as a group before. So it's interesting when you talk about legislative actions, because sometimes there are traditions and there is history, and then they do something different. So, you know, it's a little unpredictable, but that's what makes it kind of interesting this time of year. So I do expect the legislative session to wrap up quickly sometime over the next few weeks. And then there will be interim committees announced that'll be meeting later this summer, also into the fall. This is not an election year, so that's something that won't be on the table late in the fall, but I do expect there usually will be some individual committee meetings that take place. And then there are certain committees that just meet quarterly. There's a committee called it used to be known as the CanCare Oversight Committee. Now it is the much longer titled Bob Bethel Home and Community-Based Services, CanCare Oversight, and it deals with a number of other health-related topics that will meet quarterly, and that will be meeting through the end of the year. So if you would like more information on legislative items, the legislature's website is a really good page. And also, I try to let people know they similarly have a YouTube channel where they broadcast the committee meetings and also floor action. So if you ever want to go and review information from a hearing, you're welcome to do that, or see where bills are at different stages. You can pull up different versions of them or testimony from committees. So that's where we're at with the legislative process this year. In terms of the BSRB's budget, we don't get any money from the state. We operate based on the license revenue that we have. And I think I mentioned this a few times before. We actually contribute back to the state to help fund operations for other processes. So by law, we contribute 10% of all revenue we receive back to the state general fund. What the legislature does each year is they set a limit to how much we can spend. And that process starts by us submitting a budget in September. The governor's office usually reviewing that, making a recommendation. This year, the governor did make a recommendation, but separately, the legislature reviewed budgets on their own in the fall, and they made recommendations on their own. They did recommend the same amount that we had put forward as a budget. And when the House and Senate reviewed our information, they didn't make any additional changes. So the amounts that we had requested are the amounts that have been passed so far by the legislature. If there's any global items that would cover all agencies, it could affect the BSRB. If there's any new items that would come up, but from a budgetary standpoint, things are pretty much resolved for the most part this year. So looking next at some items from past board meetings, I do want to let you know the board did have a monthly meeting in March, and the board did go through a few different topics. One of the interesting topics, in my opinion, the board is working on and getting close to the conclusion of is reviewing the unprofessional conduct regulations and making recommended changes to those regulations. This has been a lengthy process, but I believe definitely worth it. some of these regulations for unprofessional conduct for certain professions had not been updated in over 20 years. When we started this project of looking through them, initially they were turned over to each of the advisory committees to review and make recommendations on changes. Once all of those were collected, we took that package and sent it back to the advisory committees so that each group could see what other groups had recommended. And then they made additional recommendations. Those have all been forwarded back to the board. And to assist the board in sort of looking at those recommended changes and then also potential modifications of things like language, I asked a number of my staff members to work with me on a very big grid. And so if you pull up any of the information from the board meeting in March, you will see that there is a document included in the material that has side-by-side unprofessional conduct regulations for each of the 7 professions. And so you can see how the language compares, or if there's certain things that are in one profession's unprofessional conduct regulation that don't exist in another one, or perhaps that are organized differently, or the language is just slightly different. So, so the board has begun the process of reviewing those, making recommendations on changes. Ultimately, when the board reaches the consensus and comes to the conclusion, those will be submitted for changes altogether. There's a number of items the board will need to make a decision on if they would like consistency between the professions, or if they would like to allow professions to maybe have different ending positions. One of the items we've talked about a little bit has been the unprofessional conduct regulation that talks about practitioners not sleeping with former clients. The general language now prohibits that activity for within 24 months of ending the client relationship. But some of the advisory committees have made recommendations that should be, once a client, it should never occur. Whereas others have said, we want to stick with the current language. So that'll be something for the board to have conversations about and discuss. And then there's some other topics sort of like that, where it'll just be up to the board to decide, do you want uniformity between these items, or do you want to allow some flexibility or some differences? And additionally, sometimes, these are all very similar profession to profession, but there are some uniquenesses based on the profession. And some professions have looked to the ethical code for their association. And so there may be things in the association's ethical code that may also point to a different direction than uniformity between the professions. So like I said, it has been a lengthy process, but I know it's been a very intentional process. And I think when the board completes this process, we'll have a really good set of unprofessional conduct standards between all the professions. So that was the one takeaway. Some items coming up for the advisory committees that I did want to let you know about. We will be going through and looking at who's coming up on terms for advisory committees. And so if any members are coming up on the end of a 2-year term, I'll be reaching out to see if they would like to be reappointed. If they are at the end of their 4th term, that does mean they will need to come off the advisory committee. And the board recently said that former advisory committee members who've already served 4 terms would be eligible to come back, but there would need to be a 2-year gap in between. So I'll be reaching out to members to get an idea if you are interested in coming off the advisory committee, or if you're interested in being reappointed. And if there's any openings, I'll talk to the advisory committees to see if they're interested at having me gauge interest from people in the profession as far as being added to the advisory committees. So that will kind of be the next step as we go forward this spring. It's kind of a yearly process. And so just want to put it on your radar for something coming up. So with that, I'll go ahead and end my report and see if there's any questions.
Thank you, Dave. Any questions?
I have a quick question. Have you heard anything from the legislator about cuts to mental health programs? Or, I know the BSRB funding sounds like all that budgeting and stuff was approved. I didn't know if there was, I've heard things floating around about all these cuts with mental health. I didn't know if that was something that you knew or have heard of or not.
I've heard of things that sort of at very high level, from a federal level, from a state level. I really don't have a lot of specifics about that. Our funding for operations is separate, and part of that is by design, and that we operate based on the license fees. And so any kind of adjustment like that, as far as what I've heard, it could affect, none of those would affect the BSRB operations. In terms of the other things that might be affected, I'm not sure I could really talk to that. We're just kind of trying to observe and trying to be helpful, but I'm not sure that I could really get into very many details as far as that goes.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Seeing none, we'll move on to old business. Continued discussion on the regulation of artificial intelligence.
So at the last meeting, and we've had a few meetings that have kind of built in this conversation, but ultimately the board would like the advisory committees to discuss the topic of artificial intelligence, educate themselves on the different things that are out there people are using, and then if they feel comfortable doing so, if there's any recommendations the advisory committees could make back to the board regarding artificial intelligence, then that would be something helpful for the board. And so I think last meeting, we provided you with some different documents. I think there was one that dealt with some guidance we've received as a state agency in terms of what we can use or what is prohibited as far as artificial intelligence. There was also a lengthy document which dealt with something that the Kansas Health Institute had worked on. And it was sort of a template for, I believe, health organizations and in terms of things to consider. And then there were a couple different associations, I believe, that had put out smaller guidance type documents. I think one of them was about 5 or 6 pages, just things to be mindful of in terms of maybe regulators or health regulators, specifically as you're talking about artificial intelligence. So I believe that all came out right before the last meeting, and so probably wasn't a good opportunity to go ahead and digest it before that meeting, but in between that meeting and this meeting, if you reviewed all that information and you have additional thoughts, this would be a good time to go ahead and have some discussion about anything that you noted, or if you have heard of any speakers that might be helpful. I think the Professional Counseling Advisory Committee just met yesterday, and they mentioned maybe having a speaker come to their June meeting to talk about the topic of artificial intelligence. So if you're familiar with anyone like that, that'd be helpful to talk to the advisory committee. Feel free to also mention anything like that as well.
Any discussion, questions?
I had to leave early last meeting. I can't find that email. Could someone send it to me by chance? It doesn't have to be right now.
With the handouts.
Yeah, I just can't find it. It's probably me, but
Sure. Yeah, I'd be happy to do that. I'll go ahead and send you a copy of this.
thanks so much.
Yeah.
All right. We'll move on to a continued discussion on adding a description of each profession to the BSRB website to inform the public of the differences between the professions. And I believe we've got some work that's been done by Kari, right?
Yes. So Kari had volunteered to draft one of the descriptions, and Iris had volunteered to draft the other. So I am actually having a little bit of technical issues pulling up PDF documents. So if there's a member of the committee that has that handy, if you are able to share that document, we can all take a look at it together. I've enabled the Zoom to allow individuals to share their screens. So if any of you have a copy of the PDF language I sent out, we could go ahead and kind of walk through it together, and Kari could share her thoughts, and Iris also could share her thoughts as well.
Let me see if I can pull that up.
And just as sort of a work ahead type thing, one of the items later on in the agenda is going through sort of the draft of the survey results. Similarly, I was able to send out the PDF, but now when I'm trying to open up PDFs, I'm having some difficulty. So if somebody could have that opened up and ready for us to talk about it, I would appreciate that too.
I'm
Okay, I can see the language. It looks like Iris is sharing.
Yes.
Great.
Okay, sorry.
And just as a reminder, if somebody is watching the broadcast for the first time, this is something that basically the board had been asked for some of our public members if there could be some language that could be added to the BSRB website to give a general description of some of the professions. We have the technical language, statutes and regulations, and that's really helpful. But this is more something targeted from someone to kind of pick up some understanding as a public member or someone visiting the website. In a way to kind of help us understand the profession and also understand maybe how they're different from some of the other professions that we also regulate.
Is Kari on?
I think she's indicated she needed to
There you
step
go.
away.
Okay. Would you like me to read through those?
Sure,
Uh,
go.
Sure.
Okay. So, I will just read through them. I kind of based mine kind of off what Kari did, because I think she got hers done first. So, she did the LMLP, and so hers states in the state of Kansas, a licensed master's level psychologist, LMLP, can engage in a number of clinical skills, including treating mental and behavioral health disorders through the use of therapy, activities, and coping strategies. Examples: cognitive behavioral therapy, dialectical behavioral therapy, group therapy, etc. They may consult with other professionals, including a client psychiatrist, physician, and other professionals who works with their client. An LMLP may also, within competency, engage in diagnostic evaluations when overseen by a doctoral level clinician. They may specialize in specific areas such as family and marriage counseling, child development, substance abuse, personality or mood disorders, amongst other diagnoses. LMLPs are able to work in a variety of settings, including but not limited to clinical practices, hospitals, and private practices.
So I may have missed this somewhere. The part where it talks about an LMLP may also within competency engage in diagnostic evaluations. Are we talking about psychological testing? Are we talking about intakes? I mean, when I hear diagnostic evaluation, I think about an intake.
I do as well. I'm not sure on that, what she was referring to. When she says overseen by a doctoral level clinician, though, it makes me think she's talking about psychological testing.
I
Okay.
thought LCPs could do that. I thought they could oversee psychovals.
Mhm.
LCPs can, but she's writing up the LMLP.
No, I know. I thought LCPs could supervise LMLPs completing psychoval.
Yeah, I've never seen it where it had to be the doctoral level.
Right, maybe
Yeah, I
she
missed something
means
somewhere.
Sometimes on specific insurances, it'll require that.
I think we probably
would
need.
it be appropriate to say independently licensed clinician and
Yes.
not get in the weeds of doctoral?
I
Sure.
like that.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I'm taking some notes here so we can update it and have it modified in the future.
Are we giving feedback or what are we doing?
Yeah, I don't know.
I guess my thought on the LMLP, I'm not sure people understand what clinical practices are.
Mhm.
I'm just thinking about just the general public that reads these. And so, could we say community mental health centers, Instead of clinical practices, or just maybe some other language that they would be familiar with in the real world.
Mm-hmm.
Two things I was going to say. I think it's really good. Just small things. They may consult with other professionals, including client psychiatrists, so on and so forth. I work with a lot of people that are really apprehensive about that, like law enforcement and things like that. So, yeah, I think it'd be great to, at the beginning of that, just have something like with client consent, if we're going to say that. Just so people know that LMLPs just aren't talking to all your professionals in your life. Um, Other thing, just a small thing, but substance abuse to substance misuse could be a good thing. Abuse is kind of old hat,
Mm-hmm.
but I like it overall.
Yeah, Kari did a nice job.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's just some nuances that I'm afraid the public wouldn't understand
Mm-hmm.
when they read some of these things. And so just helping them understand like what this looks like. So, again, the diagnostic evaluation, changing that to psychological testing.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know for me if we need to have a specialty in specific areas, if that's as needed. Maybe other people feel differently, because there's just a broad area. And I was looking at yours, Iris, and I didn't see that. So I just trying to think about how to make it consistent across the different licenses.
Yeah.
But maybe people think differently.
Yeah. I actually thought this task was going to be really easy, so that's kind of why I was like, "Oh yeah, I got it." And then I went to do it. I was like, "Oh gosh, this what am I doing?" I was like, what do they really want to know, and yeah, how do I explain it so they understand it? So I actually ended up struggling. I was glad she did hers first, but then I was like, yeah, I'm not sure if I really did this task as well as if the public will understand it.
It's a hard task. So
Yeah.
we appreciate you guys tackling it first. And
Thank you.
yeah, that's for some reason it's super intimidating to have to write a paragraph about these things.
Do you think it'd be helpful to include the level of education that's needed to get the
I
LMLP?
wondered that. I kind of well, I think I did include that in mine. Do you guys want me to read through mine and see the differences? Let's see. So I put a licensed clinical psychotherapist, LCP, is someone who has a master's degree in psychology, which includes specific coursework in psychotherapy, psychological testing, and psychopathology and diagnosis and treatment of mental disorders, as well as other foundational psychology coursework. In addition, they have passed a test in psychology and received at least 2 years of supervised experience under a specific training plan, which allows them to practice independently. They are able to diagnose, treat, and assess mental health conditions and are often found across a variety of settings, including private practices, community mental health centers, or CCBHCs. Sorry, people probably do not know what those are. Hospitals, prisons, schools, and other institutions that provide mental health assessment and treatment. They may also utilize a variety of approaches to treatment and may specialize in specific diagnosis or mental health concerns across ages and in different modalities such as individual, family, or groups.
I like it. I like how you said that at the
Well
end.
written.
I think you did a really nice job.
It would to Jennifer's point, I think it was who said that with the specialties in the first one. I like how you said it at the end, just with kind of treatments and specializations and different things without getting too specific, I guess.
Good job, Iris.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I agree as far as the CCBHC. You get certain acronyms and
Should not have, yeah. It's like another language.
yeah.
Great job, Iris. I like how you said the master's degree in psychology, which I think with, so forgive me if I'm wrong, but also doctorate levels can also apply for LMLPs, correct?
That
if they
is
don't
true.
pass, if they don't pass
is-
their test, true.
That is true. That is true.
So can we just say who has completed master's degree or higher? I mean, would that fix that?
Great job, Iris.
Thank you.
Yeah, I appreciate you putting this together.
Absolutely.
This is really helpful. Well, if you all are feeling pretty good about these descriptions, I could go ahead and have Leslie take a look at them and maybe bring them back, incorporating some of the comments and the feedback from the meeting today, and then let you take a look at some language the next meeting. And if you feel like it looks pretty good, maybe then we can kind of move forward with it.
Sounds good.
Well, thank you for your help with that. I appreciate it.
Yes.
Should there be any kind of bridge language there that an LCP is generally someone who was an LMLP, and then with this additional, because I was thinking back to somebody's earlier comment about the general public. If I looked at that, I wouldn't know that those two things were necessarily connected.
Yeah, we do generally refer to the LCP as being the independent level for the master's level psychology profession, as we kind of group things into the 7 professions regulated by the board. It's got a different naming convention, and I think that creates some confusion sometimes. But what would you all feel about that if we mentioned something about it being the independent level license for the master's level psychology profession or something like that?
I think that makes sense.
We're a little unique, and I mean, from what I understand, between 17 and 19 states licensed master's level psychology, all under all kinds of different naming conventions. And the ones that do, most of them have one level of licensing. And so for us to have 2, that is also a bit unique. And so, okay, I bet we could kind of clarify that a little bit.
I do have it listed that that they are able to practice independently in the paragraph. I don't know if we would want to list in the LMLP that they would not be able to practice independently.
I think that might be good to point out.
Under supervision or direction.
Yeah, I don't think the general public really knows what independent means. If this is truly for them to understand what we do, I don't think anybody would know what that means. So qualifying it with supervision or not supervision or something along those lines. But I bet if you surveyed 100 people and asked them what that means, they had almost no one would know.
Well, we are getting better at surveys. So, but good comments. I'm taking some notes here, so we'll try to incorporate a lot of these things into the language. But these are really good descriptions for us to work with. So appreciate Kari and Iris both. Thank you for all your work with this.
Yeah, well done. All right, that takes us to new business and a review and discussion of the draft survey report on LMLPs and LCPs.
Yes, and as I mentioned, unfortunately, with the technology still being resolved, I'm not able to pull up the PDF copy of the report, the draft report that I sent out. But if someone could pull that up or share your screen, I'd be happy to kind of walk through it with you all together and introduce you to the report and some of the language that's in there currently. And it looks like, Iris, I think you're still sharing your screen. But is there anyone who has a copy of the PDF draft report pulled up that they could share?
I might be able to try. Let me see.
Okay. And if not, I may be able to pull up at least a Word version of the beginning of that document, so we can kind of look through some of that. I think of having more luck with that.
Are we talking about the survey?
Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah, if anybody has that available, they can share the PDF that I had sent out, just to kind of pull it up on their screen. Great. And by the way, Robert Pedroza has entered the meeting, so he's in attendance now as well. So,
Do you see it?
yeah. Thank you for sharing the screen there. I will just go ahead and walk through some of this information here. As I mentioned, this is a draft report. We are still working on fine tuning this, but we did put out a survey. And if you just want to go ahead and hold there on maybe the second page or so.
Oh, right there, right here.
Yeah. So just to kind of let you know, as just a reminder, we have put out a couple surveys in the past for the social work profession, but we really wanted to expand that and allow each of the professions to have a survey for their licensees, to collect information in terms of maybe issues that practitioners are seeing out in the field, ways in which we as the BSRB or the advisory committees could tackle some other issues that people have seen out there. And then also trying to collect information to better understand the workforce and some of the dynamics there. And so we put together some questions, worked with each of the advisory committees on those. But also, before we sent out the surveys, we tried to standardize some of the questions if we could. Our hope is that we will have a nice report per profession, but then also at the end, we'll be able to have a comparative report across professions that we can have looking at all the 7 professions regulated by the board. So we did go ahead and put out a set of questions for master's level psychologists and licensed clinical psychotherapists as well. This was originally going to be held open for about 2 weeks. We decided, based on some feedback we received, to go ahead and hold it open longer. So ultimately, it was open for about a month, and we had some prompts to follow up with people who had not responded to the initial invitation to take the survey. These settings were in SurveyMonkey to keep the information confidential, so we couldn't see, who submitted what answers on a person-by-person basis, but we did have a way to see how many people had not responded to the survey, so we could send some targeted reminders. And ultimately, at the end, if you want to scroll down just a little bit on that page there, for this profession, we had 236 individuals complete the survey for an overall response rate of about 37.7%, which we were really happy with. For the LMLP level, 113 individuals completed the survey for a response rate of about 32.1%. And then for the LCPs, the level of license, 123 individuals completed the survey for a response rate of about 44.9%. So really happy with the response rate. We were shooting for something close to about, we weren't sure what to expect, honestly, because we had only surveyed the social workers before. And the response rate had improved in 24 compared to when we did in 21. But this is a good response rate for an optional survey, I thought. So what we did is in this version of the draft, we have gone through and some of the questions have an open answer, and some of them had more of a multiple choice. And so for the past surveys that we've done, we basically went question by question and we included all the information just right in the body of the report, but it made for a very lengthy report. For this report, what we tried to do was when there were open field questions, we tried to summarize a lot of the responses we received and then take all of the individual answers and include them as an appendices at the back end of the report. And I really do think reviewing those individual answers is going to be really helpful for the advisory committee to do, but we didn't want people to get bogged down before getting to the end of the report. So the report itself, currently, this version of the draft is about 20 pages or so. But the reason it is over 100 pages or close to it, I think 75 in this one, is because there's about 19 appendices that follow it. So there's a lot of different responses, and we were able to ask the questions separately to LMLPs versus LCPs. And so you can kind of see on some of the slides the responses and how they're different, one level of licensing versus the other. So Josh, do you mind going to the next page? So this was, at the beginning, we asked a couple of questions to make sure that we had a good representation of the demographics across the state. The yellow highlighting, those pages are not probably going to match. Ultimately, that does need to be modified for the final version of the report, but that is kind of clarifying that we have some summary information here. The specific answers or all the specific counties that were listed by respondents are in the back there, but we asked what Kansas County or counties do people practice in for master's level psychology. For the LMLPs that answered, the most dominant answer was Sedgwick County, and then followed by Johnson County. Oddly, about 8 answered none, and that may have been individuals who currently live out of state now or are planning to retire, or maybe are working in another area like education, and so maybe they're not practicing exactly, but that was one of the most common answers, followed by Ellis County and then Wyandotte County. And then for the LCPs, 123 answered that question. The most common counties that were highlighted were Johnson, Sedgwick, followed by Shawnee, which higher population centers, so that kind of tracks. Josh, do you mind going to the next page? Okay. So on this page, again, we were trying to make sure we had a good representation of the demographic responses. And so we asked, do you practice in a predominantly urban area, rural area, or frontier area? Concerning this question, about half the respondents said an urban area, about 46%, and then followed by individuals living in a rural area, about 44%. Other responses were less than about 6%, so the majority identified as one of the first two. LCPs, it was more pronounced. There were more individuals living in an urban area compared to a rural area. However, I did pull up the information as far as the 2020 census, and at least for Kansas, there's about 57% or so of individuals that identify as living in an urban area. So that does sort of track. It's consistent with the census results, though it is interesting that there's a bigger difference, urban versus rural, for the LCPs versus the LMLPs. On question 3, we asked, do you primarily work in public practice, private practice, educational setting, or another setting? And of the individuals who answered question 3, about a third said they worked in public practice, while nearly as many noted working in private practice. And then the most dominant field after that was other. This was not an open field question, so I don't really know exactly what it would fall under that, but education was separate. I'm not sure what area people would have identified there. That may come out through some of the other answers as we look through some of the other open field responses throughout the survey, but found that to be kind of interesting. For LCPs, you have more individuals who identify in private practice with about 43%, public practice about 35%, and then other about 13% as well. Education was under 10% for I believe both groups. So found that kind of interesting. But more individuals in private practice for the LCPs versus the split for LMLPs. In terms of question 4, how many years have you practiced master's level psychology profession? If applicable, you may include years practicing master's level psychology in other states. The most common answer here, about 43% of respondents said they practiced for over 10 years in the master's level psychology field. The next most common was 5 to 10 years, and then 2 to 5 years. And so not a large group that were 1 to 2 years or less than 1 year, but the majority, at least the highest number who responded to it, have been practicing in the field for over 10 years. And then the LCPs, that was really interesting. Most pronounced for the LCPs by far was over 10 years with about 85%. And then followed next by the 5 to 10 years for the LCPs. And then the other numbers were very, very small. So at least for the LCPs, they've been practicing for several years. And I found that to be kind of interesting, especially compared to the numbers that we got for the LMLPs. Question 5, we asked both groups, including Kansas, in how many states are you licensed as a master's level psychologist or in the master's level psychology profession? About 109 LMLPs answered the question, and almost everyone, 96%, report being licensed at the master's level practice of psychology in just one state, just Kansas. Although there were a very small number of individuals who said 2 states. And I think given that only 17 to 19 states licensed master's level psychology, also given that there's not a lot of states that would have 2 levels of licensure for master's level psychology, it's not that surprising of a result, but it does kind of confirm that most people, when we're looking at things like multi-state compacts, at least for the LMLP population, currently right now, they're mostly practicing just in Kansas. In terms of the LCPs, 123 answered that question, and the most common answer, kind of like the LMLPs, was that they are licensed to practice master's level psychology in one state, 97% just about. The most other common answer was 2 states, but that was only about 2.5%. And then I think a few individuals maybe mentioned they preferred not to answer, but again, for both levels of licensure, it appears that the vast majority are probably just practicing in Kansas. Now, they may be practicing in another field. Potentially, they might have a license in another state in a different area. But in this, we were looking specifically at master's level psychology. Question 6, we asked both groups, do you maintain an active license but no longer work as a master's level psychologist? Or in the master's level psychology field. Please explain why you are not providing services currently. So for LMLPs, 82 individuals answered the question. The most common survey response we received was that this did not apply to them because they were still continuing to work. 20 respondents, however, mentioned not providing services despite maintaining an active license. The most common reasons cited for this included providing services not being required as part of the job responsibilities, and that providing services is not required, but maintaining an active license is, which I thought was kind of interesting. 2 respondents indicated they practiced under a different license, such as maybe an LCPC, a licensed clinical professional counselor license, or a specialist social work license due to higher billing potential in other professions, and 2 respondents identified pay being better in other fields. For the LCP responses, we had 83 individuals answer that question. The most frequent response, 61 individuals said this did not apply to them because they were still working. And 3 respondents indicated that while they were retired, they continued to maintain an active license. 19 individuals indicated maintaining an active license but not providing services. Of those individuals, the most common reason was because it was not required for their job. Other examples were that the jobs did not require a license, including things like school psychologist university faculty, and other positions in the behavioral health setting. While less frequently reported as the reason noted above, other licensees pointed out they maintain an active license but do not provide services because they practice under a different license, such as with the LMLPs, or in a different state, and they provide supervision but not services. Again, I would encourage people to go back through the individual responses. I thought people were very candid in a number of their answers. Question 7. So LMLPs and LCPs, we asked, in a typical week, how many hours do you provide in-person services to clients? And we can kind of see this question compared to the next two. There was some interpretation that some people could make with this question, including what is in-person services, what all does that include, what does it not include? We just let people make that determination for themselves and limited it to how many hours do you provide in-person services to clients. So of the 112 LMLPs who answered it, the most common answer was between 20 to 40 hours per week with 39%. That was followed by between 10 to 20 hours per week with 23%. And then less than 5 hours was 20%, then 5 to 10, 12%, and then the other answers were below 4% each. For the LCPs, 123 individuals responded, and the most popular response was between 20 to 40 hours, so about a third of respondents, followed by between 10 hours and 20 hours, about a quarter. But then almost as many was less than 5 hours of direct in-person services. And then other responses were lower than 10%. And question 8, LMLPs and LCPs, in a typical week, how many hours do you provide telehealth or remote services to clients? There were 112 LMLPs who answered the question. The most common response by far was less than 5 hours per week at 62% of respondents, followed by 5 to 10 hours per week, 21%, and then the other responses were less than 8%. So at least for LMLPs, it appears that, at least as far as the respondents to the survey, the vast majority of them are not providing a very high number of hours of remote or telehealth services to clients per week. And then for the LCPs, I had 123 individuals who answered that question. The most common response, similar to the LMLPs, was about 70 to 71%, said that the amount they provided telehealth or remote services per week were about 70 or less than 5 hours, followed by 5 to 10 hours, and then 10 to 20 hours per week. And then the other responses were less than 4. So not a lot of remote services, at least for LMLPs and LCPs, according to what was reported in the survey. And then for the LMLPs, we sort of had a split question here. For the individuals who are at the LMLP level, we said, are you currently working towards attaining a licensed clinical psychotherapist LCP license in Kansas? If you are not taking steps to receive an LCP license, please explain why you made that decision. So we had 109 individuals answer that question. I would encourage individuals to go to the appendix at some point in between this meeting and the next meeting and review some of the responses. I think those are really informative. But some of the respondents noted they already hold an LCP, which I thought was kind of an interesting response. For the other professions, when we have individuals that have a licensed professional counselor license, we asked a similar question to them. Are you taking steps to get to a clinical level professional counselor license? And with the marriage and family therapy license, we asked them, are you taking steps to get to a clinical marriage and family therapy license? Because for those two professions, once you reach the clinical level license, your previous license becomes obsolete. But given the nature of some of the confusion around the terminology, master's level psychologist versus licensed clinical psychotherapist, the board has basically allowed master's level psychologists who reach the clinical level and become LCPs to maintain both levels of licensure if they want. And so that was not something I really thought about in working with the committees and developing that question. But I think some people said, I'm not working towards it because I already have it. So definitely worth noting, and that is a good answer. Some other individuals said that they are working towards a licensed psychologist license instead of an LCP. or that their current employment position does not require them to hold an LCP license, or that they need to go back and take or pass the EPPP licensing examination at the correct level. So maybe they are not taking steps right now, but that is something they will need to do eventually if they want to get to that point. Like I said, it was a split question. So for the LCPs, we asked them in a typical week, how many hours are you responsible for providing responsible for supervising, managing, or overseeing the work of others? The largest response for this question was about 65%, and that was less than 5 hours per week. There is some interpretation as far as this goes in terms of if we're talking about employment supervision, if we're talking about providing supervision to people seeking a clinical level of licensure. But one of the things that we were trying to do and lining up these questions, they have the question that talks about how many hours of in-person services, followed by how many hours of remote services, followed by how many hours are you responsible for supervising, managing, or overseeing the work of others. So at least for 2/3 of the respondents, that was not one of the major job functions, at least in terms of the number of hours they're putting forward on a week-to-week basis. But the second most common answer was 20 to 40 hours. So I found that could be kind of interesting. There's a split. And so the largest number of individuals don't have a lot of hours during their week-to-week basis doing those types of activities. But the second most popular answer was people who spend a lot of hours doing those types of activities. And so that may be something that should take a little bit more analysis to try to figure out exactly what's going on with that. And then I think the third most common answer was over 40 hours per week. And so I know some individuals are salaried and the clock does not stop necessarily if there's more work that needs to be done. So I did find that to be kind of interesting, though. I think that was the third most common answer. Question 10 for the LMLPs and LCPs, do you anticipate retiring from the master's level psychology profession in the next 5 years? So one thing, we've talked a lot about helping people get into the profession, and that has been a big conversation with the legislature and some other groups. But one thing that I've been thinking about is, how many individuals we have that are retiring from the field. And if we have individuals that are leaving the field at the same time that more are coming in, it's possible we may have a lot of people joining the professions, but we may not see the numbers really rise, unless we can really quantify what's going to happen, not just right now, but even looking ahead. So I thought this might be a helpful question. So 112 individuals who are LMLPs answered the question. The overwhelming response was no. 86% said they do not anticipate retiring from the master's level psychology profession in the next 5 years. And around 10% said they were unsure, and 5 years is a long time, so definitely understandable. For the licensed clinical psychotherapist, 122 LCPs answered the question. The most common response was no, similar to the LMLPs, but instead of it being somewhere around an 86%, it was around 67%. And the number of yeses was at 19%. So about a fifth of the individuals said at the LCP level, they do anticipate retiring from master's level psychology as a field in the next 5 years. And then I think the number for unsure is pretty similar between the two groups. And that may be just because it's hard to anticipate what's going to happen in 5 years. But I thought that was kind of interesting that the number was that much higher between the LCPs versus the LMLPs. And so that was 4.5% versus 18 or 19%. Question 11. So question 11 focused on the multi-state compact, and it said that currently no compact exists for the master's level psychology profession, but if one was created under a model that would allow individuals to practice in other compact states by charging or changing from a single state license to a multi-state license for an additional cost, would you be interested in obtaining a multi-state license under such a compact? This model that's described there, that's the social work compact model. And so some of the responses, 111 LMLPs answered the question. The most frequent survey response, 86 respondents, was yes, they would have a lot of interest in switching from a single state to a multi-state. If there was a compact, they'd be very interested in it. Other responses, the most frequent reason was that they lived near a border state, and a multi-state compact would broaden who the Kansas licensees could provide services to. The respondents indicated having to frequently turn down clients who live in another state. And second most common reason, 11 responses, was that it would allow people to move out of state, which they have not done because of lacking reciprocal licenses in other states. Furthermore, 9 responses spoke to being able to continue care with patients or clients that are either out of state temporarily or that move out of state. And 8 responses indicated that obtaining a multi-state license would open up more career opportunities. While less frequently identified as the reasons above, other common reasons why respondents would be interested in obtaining a multi-state license include being able to move more people, having widespread services, or help more people, having more widespread services, being able to work in multiple states, and gaining more telehealth clients. And 2 respondents noted that they'd be willing to pay the additional cost and obtain their LCP for the sole purpose of practicing under a multi-state compact. 14 responses indicated that the individual might be interested, but it would depend on factors such as how much the additional cost would be and what other states were part of the compact, which is very valid. None of the compacts for mental health have been joined by all states. The SIPAC compact, which only applies to PhD or LP psychologists, I think has around 42 states now, so it's getting close, but there are still some holdout states that are not part of that compact. And for professional counseling and social work, they are still growing. They're relatively new, and neither one of those is active yet. But not all states have joined the compacts, even though they have been popular. 7 respondents stated they would not join the compact. The most frequent reason why was due to individuals being too close to retirement. Furthermore, 4 respondents said they would not be interested at this time, but maybe in the future if it aligns with their family and goals for home. Of the LCPs, the most frequent survey response, 96 respondents, was that yes, licensees would be interested in obtaining a multi-state license under a multi-state compact. The following list contains reasons why they would support a compact. It would make working close to a border state easier. It would make service accessibility to more people. It would allow for smoother continuity of care when clients move out of state or temporarily leave the state, such as on vacation. It would make master's level psychology profession more recognizable to other states. And maybe there's a couple more on the following page. A multi-state compact would give licensees the ability to relocate without the inability to practice. And a multi-state compact would hopefully expand insurance reimbursements. Further, 6 respondents indicated they would participate in a multi-state compact for telehealth purposes, and 5 pointed out they'd be interested so long as they maintain the same privileges they currently have. Conversely, about 13 people said they would not be interested in a multi-state compact, and 2 of those individuals credited retirement for their lack of interest. 4 cited their age as reason, and 9 respondents said they might be interested, with 5 of these licensees saying it would depend on the other states who were in the compact. And then 3 respondents indicated that while they're not interested right now, they may be in the future. Under question 12, this was asked to both LMLPs and LCPs. To assist the work of the board, the BSRB has 7 standing advisory committees, 1 for each of the professions regulated by the board, which are primarily composed of licensees in each of the 7 professions. Advisory committees discuss topics relevant to the work of the board and make recommendations back to the board on potential changes to the statutes and regulations governing the profession. These meetings are broadcast on the BSRB YouTube channel every other month. On a scale of 1 to 5, how familiar are you with the work of the Master's Level Psychology Advisory Committee? And when we had that rating system, 5 was completely familiar, 4 was very familiar, 3 was about average, 2 was somewhat familiar, 1 not familiar, or prefer not to answer. The dominant answer with 2/3 of the respondents was that they are not familiar with the work of the advisory committee. The second most common answer was 2, somewhat familiar, about 21%. And then all other answers were under about 9%. And for the LCP responses, we have a similar result. The most common answer for the LCPs was about 47%, but they were not familiar with the work of the advisory committee. 30% said they were somewhat familiar. About 12% said they had an average level of familiarity, and then other responses were under 6%. So I do know that there were some comments that were made in other sections that expressed appreciation for the survey. and they noted that they appreciate being informed about the work of the advisory committee and who the advisory committee is and the work that the BSRB is doing in this area, and that the meetings are being broadcast. And they noted that they would be more interested in checking out information as far as the work of the advisory committee now that they're aware of it. So I think part of this answer, I think it was helpful to kind of gauge this information, but I think one of the benefits of even just asking this question was helping all the individual licensees be made aware of that information. And hopefully this will make more people want to access information on the BSRB website, that maybe they'll have more motivation to check out a meeting, or maybe be interested in putting in an application when we have an opening on the advisory committee. So I do think, even though the answers were pointed in one direction, that there's work for us to do, I am encouraged by some of the feedback we got in response to that survey question. Question 13, over the past 2 years, based on your observations and experience practicing in the master's level psychology profession, could you share information on any practice-related negative issues that you have seen, such as areas where practitioners appear to need more continuing education or training in a certain area? Now we're kind of getting into sort of the meat of the survey as it relates to the work of the board and the advisory committees. And 96 individuals answered that question, identifying a wide variety of comments. 37 respondents indicated experiencing no practice-related negative issues, which is good to hear. 59 respondents reported they had experienced some issues, though. The most frequent negative issue reported centered around the need for more training. Specifically, licensed master psychologists report a need for more training in autism, neurodivergence, trauma, suicide intervention, addiction, telehealth, and the LGBTQ+ community. While less frequently identified as the items above, other licensees pointed out issues regarding diagnostics, assessments, and insurance, legal information and updates, and other reported issues of resistance and or lack of recognition from doctoral licensees and employers. Under the responses from the LPCs, about 103 individuals answered the question. 46 respondents indicated have experiencing no practice-related negative issues in the last 2 years. 29 responses centered on the need for more training. Specifically, the most frequently reported training were in the following areas: treatment, diagnostics, ASD and neurodivergence, trauma, psychological testing, marriage and family therapy, sex and gender affirming care, evaluations, psychological assessments, diversity, and cultural issues. And while less frequently identified as the previously noted above, other licensees pointed out practice-related negative issues concerning insurance carriers and the fact that most other states do not recognize master's level psychology licensure. Other respondents indicated seeing concerns in the area of substance use or abuse in terms of diagnoses, dual relationships, and suicide or crisis care. Concerns were also raised regarding there not being a way to confirm that non-clinical licensed master's level psychologists are receiving proper supervision. Question 14, and if you just are curious, we only go to about 19 questions, so we're getting towards the end of the survey. You want to allow some time for discussion, and as I mentioned, this is still in a draft form, so there will be some additional analysis and cleanup work, but we are getting towards the end of the question. Question 14, LMLP and LCP. Over the last 2 years, have you experienced any issues concerning telehealth, either through professional practice or observations from other practitioners? LMLP response. So 105 individuals answered the question. The most frequent survey response, 74 responses, was that individuals had not experienced any issues concerning telehealth, which I think when we get positive results, that's worth noting as well. Of the 74, 6 respondents expressed strong support for telehealth. 3 respondents indicated they had either no experience with it or do not provide telehealth. 28 responses provided insight into issues concerning telehealth. While the most frequently reported issue, 9 responses, was connectivity and technology issues. While less frequently identified, other issues identified including insurance issues, clients wanting telehealth services while out of state, and difficulty with clients finding a private setting for telehealth services. Of the LCPs that answered, 107 individuals answered the question. 70 responses indicated having no experience or no issues related to telehealth. And after providing this response, some individuals mentioned that telehealth has improved the accessibility of services. 13 respondents expressed support for telehealth. Both positive and negative remarks were identified in response to this survey question. Among the positive remarks, the most frequently occurring statements were as followed. Telehealth is easy. Telehealth requires less paperwork than in-person services. Telehealth reduces no-shows. Telehealth benefits rural outreach. Telehealth is helpful when transportation issues arise. And telehealth works well with adults. The following negative remarks about telehealth were most frequently reported. There are additional insurance barriers to face if providing telehealth. Providers cannot continue to provide telehealth services if clients move out of state or leave the state temporarily. Connectivity and internet issues occur with telehealth, and there are privacy and confidentiality concerns with telehealth. Question 15. This was only asked of the LCPs. How many individuals do you currently provide supervision to? And as you might notice, this was a small error in the drafting of this question. We neglected to include a response that said they provide supervision to 0 individuals. So the most common answer we had to this question was prefer not to answer with 37.1%. And in future questions in the open responses, they noted that some of the reason they answered this way is because there was not an option to pick 0. So, but it is worth noting that for the individuals who did indicate how many individuals they provide supervision to, the most common response was 1, with about 24% of the respondents. The next most common was 3 to 5 with 12%. But there are about 11% of individuals who responded to this question that provide supervision to more than 10. And that intrigues me. I have heard of some concerns in other states with individuals that are providing supervision to a lot of people. And at a certain point, it calls into question, how many people can you effectively provide supervision to? We do not have a limit in terms of how many people someone is able to provide supervision to. And so this was an interesting question, but at least for the vast majority of respondents, it appears that it is between 1 to 5 if they are providing supervision.
Can I provide a comment on that real fast, Dave? Okay.
Yeah. Mhm.
I just wonder, I wonder what the age of those practitioners are. I could see them, if you're not seeing clients, I think seeing 10 or more people under supervision is probably doable.
Okay.
Kind of like seeing clients, but just a thought. Okay, I'll keep scrolling.
Thank you. I appreciate you scrolling. You're doing a great job, by the way. Question 15. So since we asked the supervision question to the LCPs, it's going to be off, but we were able to get the other questions roughly the same. So this is question 15 for the LMLPs, question 16 for the LCPs. Over the last 2 years, have you experienced any negative issues involving supervision? LMLP responses, 102 individuals answered the question. The most frequent survey response, 85 responses, was that individuals have not experienced any negative issues involving supervision. So like I said, sometimes good information is helpful too. 17 respondents indicated they had experienced negative issues though involving supervision. Of the 17 responses, the most frequently reported issues were being unable to find a supervisor and poor quality and or inadequate supervision. Examples cited for poor quality and or inadequate supervision included discrimination, being treated as inferior and a burden by supervisors, and judgmental, unreachable, and unsupportive supervisors. While less frequently identified as the issues noted above, other licensees pointed out that the cost of supervision is too high for them to afford, and 2 respondents also indicated experiencing power struggles in supervision. For the LPCs or LCPs who responded, 110 individuals answered the question. 88 respondents indicated experiencing no negative issues involving supervision over the last 2 years, which is good. Good response there. 10 individuals did note they do not provide supervision, and 11 respondents reported experiencing negative issues related to supervision. The only negative issue that was reported more than once was the recurrence of supervisees being unable to pass the EPPP at the clinical level. Other negative issues pointed out issues revolving around turnover, workload, and professionalism. Question 16 for LMLPs and 17 for LCPs. Do you currently use artificial intelligence, AI, in your practice? If you do, in what area do you use AI? For the LMLPs, 106 individuals answered the question. The most frequent survey response, 90 responses, was that individuals did not use AI in their practice. Of the 90, 5 noted either they would be interested in using AI or that they plan to start using it soon. 16 respondents indicated they do not use AI in their practice. The most frequently, or they do use AI in their practice. The most frequently reported use of AI was that AI is used to assist in progress notes for note taking. And while less frequently identified, other areas identified include AI for differential diagnosis, documentation, formatting, generating checklists, personal study, reframing concepts, and writing outline. For LCPs, 119 individuals answered the question. 106 individuals responded to the survey saying they do not use AI in their practice. Of the 106 responses, 5 expressed interest in learning more about how it's used. 13 licensees indicated using AI in their practice. The most frequently reported use of AI in practice was for note-taking and progress notes. Less frequently reported uses include documentation, report writing, billing, basic template creation, and research. And I will tell you, this is one of those questions that we will do some more research on between now and the next meeting to provide a little bit more analysis. Some of the answers people gave cited specific AI tools that people are using. And I think we might include a bulleted list in the final analysis so people can see what people consider to be AI and then what items are currently being used. Question 17 for LMLPs and 18 for LCPs. Based on your experience with the licensee in Kansas, do you have any recommendations on additional ways the BSRB could protect and serve consumers of services offered by BSRB licensees? 88 LMLPs answered the question. The most frequent survey response, 50 responses, was no, meaning they did not have any recommendations on additional ways the BSRB could protect and serve consumers of services. After the no answers, the most frequent survey response, with 9 responses on recommendations and additional ways that the BSRB could protect and serve consumers, related to insurance barriers, specifically to broadening and expanding billing abilities and coverage. These responses also included comments regarding the issue that not all insurance companies recognize the master's level psychologist license. Other licensees recommended expanding the ability to practice outside of state lines, having more communication between the BSRB and licensees, analyzing EPPP requirements, and allowing individuals to practice without supervision after holding a license for a specific period of time. While 2 responses recommended reducing the influence of state and community mental health centers, CMHCs, 1 response expressed support for these centers. Furthermore, respondents expressed a desire for more affordable continuing education and for licensure barriers to be removed. Licensure barriers in this context referred to the cost of the LMLP licensure and the transition from LMLP to licensed clinical psychotherapist LCP licensure. For the LCPs, 94 individuals answered the question. 60 individuals reported having no recommendations for additional ways the BSRB could protect and serve consumers. The most frequently reported way in which BSRB could protect and serve consumers, 7 responses, included advocating for better and higher insurance, Medicare, and Medicaid reimbursements. 6 licensees reported advocating for either a multi-state compact or reciprocity with other states. And other respondents indicated a need for the master's level psychology profession to be better recognized. There were also recommendations made concerning the EPPP examination, specifically in regard to reducing the passing score. And then I think this is the last question on the survey. Question 18 for the LMLPs and 19 for the LCPs. Do you have any other comments or feedback you think would be helpful for the members of the advisory committee to receive when evaluating possible recommendations for changes to the statutes and regulations for the master's level psychology profession? For the LMLPs, 84 individuals answered the question. The most frequently occurring topic that was referenced by 7 individuals was the EPPP licensing examination. Specifically, recommendations were made to lower the clinical passing score, allowing for retakes prior to completion of clinical hours, and to not require the EPPP2. Responses also pointed out the financial burden the EPPP examination creates. The second most frequently occurring topic, 5 responses, was expressed support for a multi-state compact. While less frequently identified, others pointed out the inability to receive supervision or get clinically licensed at a reasonable cost, insurance barriers faced by licensees, and the growing shortage of practitioners. Responses also pointed to the idea of being able to practice without supervision after being in the field for X number of years, as well as staying up to date with APA's accreditation of master's level programs. 39 respondents did not have any additional comments or feedback to provide. And then for the LCPs, 85 LCPs answered the question. The most frequently reported topics in responses to the survey question included insurance barriers and advocating for either reciprocity or a multi-state compact. 5 respondents recommended advocating for better recognition of the profession. But I can tell you in looking through all the responses that we received, individuals were very candid, and some individuals really put forth a lot of thoughtful answers. And so we wanted to make sure that we got this information to you now. It's a little bit clunky, it's a little bit floppy. We will definitely clean up, so we'll have a nice version of the report at the end. But as I mentioned, following that 20 pages or so of the analysis, we included a separate appendices for each one of the questions that had an open field response. And so you can go through this information and go question or item by item and just see all the individual responses. I really appreciated how forthcoming people were in what they said and all the different perspectives. I appreciated the positive comments, and I appreciated the challenging comments about ways that we can do things better. But I do think that one of the hopes from the survey was that people would be forthcoming enough that it would provide the advisory committee and the board with several different topics that maybe the board had been considering, and this would show support for considering those further. Or maybe there's some things that weren't even on the radar of the advisory committee of the board that some individuals in the field could spotlight. And so I do think we got a lot of really good information and a lot of really good data, and really excited to continue to work through all of this with you. So wanted to give you the draft today and encourage you to look through all of those answers. But I've been talking for a little bit, going through all of that, and Josh, appreciate you going answer by answer there. But I'll go ahead and pause here and open up for discussion or comments or any questions from people about the survey responses so far.
Thank you, Dave. Thank you, Josh. Any questions or comments?
I think it brings up a lot of really interesting things to think about, Dave. Like, for instance, someone mentioned, like, should you be able to practice so long and not have to receive supervision? I think that's a really worthy topic. There are just little things like that I think were really good for future discussion. So.
We had also talked about whether it made sense for there to be a alternate pathway to clinical licensure that didn't require the EPPP, but more years of supervision.
It's actually the one I was going to bring up. That was one of the ones, because I think when we think about people who maybe passed for the LMLP, but maybe they just don't test very well, but they show competency through supervision. If they've been practicing for so much time, I do think it might be worth having a longer discussion about that over time to see how to support those folks that have showed competency and then continue to want to be in the field and maybe just don't want to get their LCP, or maybe that they just struggle with that testing portion of it.
I interviewed someone the other day, had 30 years experience as an LMLP, and I was like, why do you still need supervision?
Well, and that was one of the things, when we're looking at the 2 levels of license, there are a fair number of people that are at the LMLP level. And one of the takeaways I was hoping that we would get some really good information on is why are people at the LMLP for longer than 2 years? Why would they be interested in staying at the LMLP level versus going to an LCP or perhaps the LP level? And there's some really interesting perspectives on that one. Some people said my job doesn't require it, but I like keeping my license active, and I can appreciate that. I'm an attorney, and I don't work as an attorney for the board, but I definitely want to keep my law license active to be able to call myself an attorney, and I use some of those skills. And so but yeah, some of the other individuals who, maybe they paused things and they want to come back to it eventually to move to an LML or LCP or, but it's interesting to get the feedback and kind of hear answers from people. So
It's the test. That's what I hear over and over again. I don't want to take the test.
The issue about supervision too, I think, sometimes people are providing kind of supervision the way BSRB thinks about it, like clinical supervision for licensure, but oftentimes they're providing kind of more like administrative supervision. But they still think about it in those terms, or they're supervising people who are not clinicians. So I think the kind of boots on the ground perspective on supervision is probably a lot broader than it is in terms of how we see it specifically as BSRB. Anything in the survey jump off?
yeah, that's what I was curious about too, if anybody was surprised by answers or.
I was surprised that there weren't, just in general, I know that 0 wasn't an option on the LCP, but I was really surprised the number of people that weren't overseeing anybody or didn't do the not applicable. And obviously that's by choice, but I actually expected it to be the other swing or at least middle.
I think what caught me might have been, I'm like, oh, that comment, that's so true. And then I thought that's possible it was my comment. But I think the majority of us in this field, we love to learn. I love to learn. I wish I could take more CEUs or take more time for classes or, like I love that aspect, but my work doesn't pay for it. They don't want to give me the time off for it. So I have Sundays essentially, to get my CEUs, and it's unless I, block off certain time. And it's just, I think that's, I heard that in a couple, I can't remember if it was the same question on the LMLP and LCP one that I heard it, or if it was two different areas or two different questions. I should have wrote down the question number, but just the lack of training. People are craving this knowledge. And I don't know that this is something that we can necessarily solve. I think it's within it. I used to have when I was an Emporia, they would pay for my CEUs and give me that time. And my employer here in Wichita is like, what do you need? Why do you need it? I mean, it's just like pulling teeth. So I don't know what the answer is to that, but if there was more time or more money to be able to do that stuff, I think that would help a lot of people. People crave it. So I don't know if that was my response or if you got several that said that. I can't remember how many, but I hope I'm not alone in that.
Well, there is an item that is on the to-do list. It has had to kind of be bumped down in priority because of some other things, but we are still working on developing the jurisprudence optional webinar series for each of the levels of licensing. And that's not going to be educational in all areas, but at least that will help make sure that people are informed about the state-specific requirements and some of the things that we sometimes see people make mistakes on in terms of, they renew their license before they actually finish all of their CE hours, or, maybe they're, one thing that kind of is interesting to me, when I was going through some of this information, and some of my staff members who helped me go through and analyze all of this as well. I really do need to say I really appreciate the work of Emma and Tyla and other staff members who helped do a lot of the reviewing of the information too. We've been working on this as a team, formatting everything and trying to provide some analysis, and they've done a great job picking out some of the important topics. But we were talking a little bit, and it seems like there is a fair number of individual licensees that may not understand the limitations of our jurisdiction. There were a lot of comments about things like reimbursements, and I think there's different ways to approach that. We could say, that's not us, that's somebody else. We'll focus on what we can focus on. But I really hope too, we could take these results and we can focus on things that the board does have jurisdiction on, but for the things that we don't, maybe this can be a way that we could start new conversations with different entities. And we can basically say, we polled individuals, we got good information, we're working on some of these things, but some of these things maybe, this information may be helpful to you. So let's share copies of this information. Here's a report. We're happy to help in this area, but it's outside of what we do. Maybe we can start conversations with different groups and give them this information, and then it can be helpful outside of what we're actually able to influence directly.
I think that would be a great idea. I think it would be important for the state to see some of those comments. Just because of the transition we've been going through in CMHCs over the last 5 years, so that maybe there still are some issues.
I think that'd be great. From a public perspective, it's there's a lot of private practitioners trending towards the cash only practice, which is fine and great and all that, but it obviously limits people they can see. So if we can have any influence over reimbursement rates or advocating for that or whatnot, then it also helps, the public with maybe practitioners veering less towards cash only, if they saw more of a benefit of insurance. So
Dave, once that gets kind of cleaned up, is that something that would be posted on the BSRB website?
Yes. So our goal is to get a draft out to each of the advisory committees this month, and then have a comparative report across professions for the board at the next board meeting in May. And if we can get the individual reports cleaned up by that time, we would be posting these on the BSRB website under our, there's a section on the website for resources, and we have a section there for publications. And so we have 2 publications already posted for the previous surveys we did for social work. But this will be a lot more of these reports that we can add to that section of the website. And so that's the goal. If we can get these all cleaned up and ready, maybe sometime right around the next board meeting in May, we could have these posted, and then we could make them kind of widely available.
Yeah, I think that would be great, as well as if there's an opportunity to kind of address some of those things that people think BSRB has some influence over, but really doesn't, and maybe even pointing them then in the direction of who they should be talking to about those issues.
Yeah, I wonder if maybe we can, I'm sure this profession is not the only profession where we've gotten some points like that, where we say that's a good point. I'm not sure what we can do about that, but that's a good point. And that maybe we can come out with sort of a little response to some of the survey things that we could post with all of the reports. Maybe it's just a reaction to the survey or something like that. I don't know. Definitely, these are going to be foundational for driving the work of the board and the advisory committees in the future. But even if it's something like an FAQ type thing, it does kind of point to me that I have more work to do in terms of helping people understand, the work the board is doing. But like I said, some of those comments that really said I wasn't aware the advisory committee was meeting every other month, or that the meetings were available to watch, and now I'll make more of a priority to do that. And it's like, well, that's exactly what we're going for. More people are informed, more people participate. So yeah, that'll be the hope. But I think probably middle of May is what we're shooting for, because that'll be around the time of the board meeting.
Very good. Any additional comments?
I do have one. I mean, another thing that's in there is just the recognition of the licensure as well. And I've brought that up before. I mean, that's on a lot of different applications and stuff as well. And I don't think there's a lot that can be done necessarily through the BSRB. I don't know. And I don't know what would need to happen with that, but because it relates a lot to the insurance stuff too. Like for instance, Medicare won't recognize LMLPs or pay for LMLPs, but will pay for other level master level. So it just doesn't make sense. So it's not recognized. But that was brought up quite a bit too. So that's just another issue. And I'm not sure there's not much that can be done there. But yeah, where do you direct them? The other issue that I think I had brought up a while back is I would like people to be able to take their test before waiting that 2 years. And there was a lot brought up with the testing, but waiting that 2 years is killer.
Yeah, and that was something the board discussed, and the board is in favor of modifying that. I think in talking to Leslie, I think we will need to make one technical change to allow that to happen, but the board was supportive of that for
Awesome.
master's level psychology or people applying for the LCP, and then also I believe for the marriage and family therapy profession as well, because they use the same test with 2 different pass points for their 2 levels of permanent license. So
Perfect.
All right. We'll move to a discussion on possible topics for this year.
You just outlined some good ones.
Yeah, I was
mhm.
gonna say, can we, with the one that Josh said about, the LMLPs that have so much experience, I don't know if we can, how we can continue that discussion, because that seems very valid. And after so many years of experience, do I really need supervision with whatever? I don't know. That's a good topic, I think.
And I would encourage you all, and I think the analysis is good in the draft report so far, but I really do think in the next couple months, if you could review, I know it's lengthy, but all the appendices and all the information, I think you'll find some of those comments really interesting, and it might drive some of the topics for the future as well.
Well, and I imagine the list that you've got, when you said that some people put some very specific stuff with AI, I think that would be interesting, just because I feel like I don't even know what some people are using. So to see that and to go through some of those would be helpful.
Yeah, I'm not an expert on AI, so it's kind of interesting reviewing some of that information because I was trying as much as possible to keep individual remarks in the same tone and the same language people put into the survey. I was trying to do some very minor spell check type modifications, but when it came to some of the AI tools, I was like, I don't know if this is a creative spelling of an AI tool that I'm not familiar with, or if this is something that is just way off. But yeah, it made me kind of want to look up some of those tools that people referenced. And so I'll be doing a little research myself on that.
Okay, our next meeting is scheduled for June 4th at 1 p.m. Are there any other items to come before the group? Seeing none, do we have a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
I'll second.
Second, very good. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Thank you all again for your participation and have a great rest of your week.
See you
Thanks,
guys.